Wireframe models can be used in lots of different ways. You could use them to show off a model's topology in renders. You could 3D print them and put it on your wall. Who knows what you could do? I actually show how to make a wireframe model in my 3D printing course for Maya, but in this video, I'll show you how to make one in ZBrush. Let's see how it works. Because wireframe models strip out all the details, they work best with objects that have a very recognizable overall structure. So for this example, we're going to use a T-Rex skull. You'll also want to use this on a model that has a very low polygon count. So one thing you could do is, let's see, drop down to the lowest subdivision level. And actually this density of wireframe is actually still kind of too dense. You want something that's really loose. So you could use Z-Remesher and set it to a really low polygon count and see what you get. Let me undo that. That's even still probably too high. Even that's still kind of high. I wonder how low I can go. Okay, so you could use a really low polygon model like this, but actually what I prefer to do, is hit Control Z to undo that. What I prefer to do is go to Decimation Master and actually create a more jagged triangulated mesh. So I'm going to pre-process this, just sort of calculate how this is going to decimate. Go back to Z plugin. We'll just decimate this really low. All right, that's kind of okay. I even want it lower, so I'm going to go do that again. Pre-process, and then, let's see, decimate current again. Oh, that's a little bit too low. The teeth kind of disappeared. I'm going to hit Control Z to undo that. Let's try to set this a little higher. Still a lot of the teeth are disappearing. I'm going to hit Control Z. Z plugin, let's set this a little higher. All right, that looks pretty good. We can see all the teeth, but overall it kind of has this really faceted polygonal look. This is going to look really cool as a wireframe model. A lot of the time when I make wireframe models, it's for 3D printing. So if we're going to 3D print something, we need to know how big it's going to be. So I'm going to go into the size settings here. You can see that it is currently a little over 2 units on the longest side. I want this to be about 1 foot long, so I'm going to drag this up to about 12. So that's 12 inches. All right, that's good. Let me hit F so I can zoom out to this new size. Now what we're going to do is turn each one of these polygonal edges into a wire. This is going to be a few tricks. It might not make sense at first, but once you've done it, it'll kind of make sense. So let's get into it. For this, I'm going to use the Zmodeler Brush. So let's hit B, Z, M on the keyboard to get the Zmodeler Brush. I'm just going to hold the mouse over a polygon and hold down the spacebar so we can go into the settings for the Zmodeler Brush with polygons. What I'm going to use for this is the Inset settings, and I want to have it applied to all the polygons. And I also want to set it to border only. All these settings might not make a lot of sense, but when I demonstrate it, hopefully it'll show you what I'm talking about. Now we just release spacebar, and what I want to do is zoom in here close and just click and drag on a polygon. So what you can see it's doing is I set it to inset. So what that does is it takes all the polygons and it sort of creates this extrusion where they all sort of extrude inwards from the center of each polygon. And then I set it to all polygons, so it's doing to all of them rather than just the one I clicked on. And then when I set it to border only, what that means is that it gets rid of a new polygon that would normally be created in that hollow space in the center and just leaves the border. So what I want to do is actually just move the cursor so that I just get a very thin wire here. We'll be thickening it up later, but for right now I just want it to be very thin. Also, one reason that I'm keeping them very thin is because as I was extruding out that thickness, you might have noticed that it was very inconsistent. Some of the wires were thicker, some were thinner. By making them very thin, I can thicken them all out by the same amount later on. All right, so I'm just going to rotate around this and maybe zoom in a bit more here. So you can see that all of these wires are very thin. They actually don't have any thickness at all. So to add thickness, I'm going to make sure I'm hovering over a polygon. I'm going to hold down spacebar. Let's go into QMesh mode. And what this is going to do is allow us to extrude out thickness. I want to apply this to all polygons. and let go of spacebar, and now click and drag on a polygon. Now you can see that it's extruding out thickness. And let's make it just kind of roughly as thick as the wire in the other direction. All right, let's zoom out a little bit here. I'm going to hit Shift F to turn off wireframe. Now I want to thicken these all up to a specific amount. Now you could go into deformation and go to inflate and just sort of drag this up. But actually what you might find, let me just kind of drag this up so it's really obvious, is that it's thickening very inconsistently. You might notice some of these edges are a lot thicker than others. Sometimes they're getting really thin. It's very inconsistent. And the reason why that's doing that is that each one of these wires is made up of just one polygon across the entire length of it. It's not broken up into different subdivisions. And so that actually causes the inflation to happen inconsistently. So I'm going to hit Control Z to undo that. So what I'm going to do is subdivide this model, but I need to do it in a special way so that it doesn't smooth out like the standard subdivision does. So instead of just clicking on divide here, I'm going to turn off smooth mode. So when it subdivides, it adds new polygons. It divides every polygon into smaller polygons, but it does it without changing the shape. I'm just going to do this several times. You might notice the active points going up here. So it's now at 3.5 million. I can do this one more time before my computer really starts to get bogged down with all the polygons. Okay, so about 14 million points. That's actually almost 30 million polygons. So now let's go back down to deformation. And let's try to inflate this. All right, so now you can see they're all inflating consistently. Let me check on one thing. I'm not sure if the normals are flipped. Let me check under display properties. Let's turn off double-sided. Yep, just as I suspected. The model is inside out, so I'm just going to click flip here so that all the wires are facing the right side out. All right, good. All right, so one thing I want to do is make sure that these wires are thick enough for 3D printing. For a wireframe model like this, it's usually a good idea to get it printed in the white, strong, and flexible material through Shapeways. It's a laser-sintered nylon. It's a really strong material, great for these kinds of sculptures. But what I want to do is just turn off perspective mode so we're not getting any perspective distortion when we're comparing the size of this. And I just want to zoom in. Look at this really close. I'm going to get a manipulator out and just click and drag. And what I want to do is make sure that this line is the right length. So what I recommend is that the wire thickness for a sculpture like this to be about 2 millimeters. You could get away with like 1.5 millimeter thickness. Since we made our model in inches, 2 millimeters is about 0.07 inches. So I'm going to make the length of this until it reads about 0.07 up here. All right, that's pretty close. And we'll just move this manipulator by clicking on this center circle here so that it's right over that wire. And we'll go back to deformation. And we'll just inflate this just enough so that that wire comes out to the same thickness as that length of the manipulator. Maybe just a little bit more for good measure, just in case. All right, looks good. Let's go back to draw mode. I'm going to hit F to zoom out. And there is our finished wireframe. All right, just a couple more things we need to do before this is totally ready to export. We need to decrease the polygon count because really millions of polygons is too much. So I'm going to go to Z plugin, decimation master. Let's pre-process current. And this is just going to take a few minutes to think about which polygons are expendable and which it needs to keep. All right, now that that's done, we can go to the decimation master and actually fully do the decimation. We want to get that polygon count to underneath 1 million. So something around that's probably good. We could probably bring it much lower even because it's really just straight wires. There's no detail that we need to keep, so we could bring that pretty low. All right, let's decimate current. Okay, it didn't look like anything changed, but that's a good thing. Let's zoom in here and make sure it did it. I'm going to hit Shift F to turn on wireframe. So you can see that we have the wireframe, but it's been decimated. It's a little bit triangulated. That's fine. Shift F to turn that off again. And now all you would need to do is save this out as an OBJ and upload it to Shapeways, and just make sure you set your units to inches. Go ahead and try this technique out on any of your own models. It's a really cool effect. I enjoy it. I make it all the time.